Hello Nigeria, hello Abuja. A good evening to you. Welcome to Data Chat, powered by NY Post Limited. Data Chat is a platform where we analyze, interpret, discuss survey findings to further help policymakers in decision making. I am Basi Patricia Atim, Communications Officer, NY Post Limited. Welcome back. So on today's Data Chat edition, we'll be talking about a very important issue that is burning in Nigeria currently. I mean, it happens all around, but this focus is on Nigeria as a whole. There is a lifelong trauma that comes with gender-based violence, either for the victim or for the children raised in such environments. The United Nations defines domestic violence as a pattern of behavior in any relationship used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. On today's episode of Data Chat, we'll be focusing and discussing more on gender-based violence in Nigeria as a whole. So it is a known fact that gender-based violence is prevalent in Nigeria. A gender equality poll conducted by NY Post in March 2022, earlier this year, shows, and this was also conducted in commemoration of the 2022 International Women's Day, and findings from the poll reported that 15% of Nigerians are of the opinion that curbing gender-based violence will help overcome gender equality in Nigeria. So this invariably makes gender-based violence a human rights violation, hence the need for appropriate legislations and sanctions for perpetrators to be employed. So this is a conversation we urge everyone to be a part of. Call in, share in your comments, and let's hear from you. Today's episode will be focused on the Afrobarometer Round 9 survey in Nigeria on gender-based violence. Our focus will be on enforcement and rehabilitation. Afrobarometer is a pan-African non-partisan survey research network that provides reliable data on African experiences and evaluation of democracy, governance, and quality of life. And NY Post is a national partner in Nigeria. I would also like to point out that this survey was not just conducted in Nigeria alone. The survey was also conducted in other African countries, including Nigeria. So findings from this poll, or the findings we'll be discussing, the survey findings we'll be discussing, will be that for Nigeria. So we'll be right back before we go right into the conversation. Welcome back to Data Chat. I am joined in the studio now with Gladys Emmanuel. She's Advocacy Officer and in-house lawyer at Tabitha Empowerment Center. So she will be joining us. She will be helping us to share and to share insights, give perspectives on gender-based violence in Nigeria and generally as a whole. It's a pleasure to have you, Gladys.
Thank you so much.
So, before we go right into the conversation, before we talk about gender-based violence, which is a burning topic, if you would agree with me that it's a burning topic in Nigeria currently and globally. So, we'll take our head of social research at NY Post, who will take us through the survey findings. So we'll be right back. His name is Mr. Raphael Mbegu.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Nigerians. From Afrobarometer Round 9 survey in Nigeria on gender-based violence, we had asked Nigerians series of questions regarding gender-based violence, their perception, their experience, and what they feel should be done to address the issue of gender-based violence. We asked them, in your opinion, which of the following issues relating to women's rights and equality do you think is the most important for our government and society to address? So interestingly, we found out that gender-based violence ranked third among the most important women rights issues that Nigerian citizens want their government and society to address. So some of the things they mentioned specifically are Too few women in influential positions in government need to be addressed. Unequal access to education was also flagged as an important area that need to be addressed. Gender-based violence, of course, was mentioned as an important area that needs to be addressed either by government and by society. Unequal opportunity or pay in the workplaces was mentioned hugely. Unequal rights of property and ownership of inheritance was also mentioned. So there are a few other things also, but these are major things Nigerians feel should be addressed to better, make women position in the country safe. So we ask again, in this area, how common do you think it is for men to use violence against women and girls in their communities? Interestingly, we found out that majority of the respondents, 58%, says violence against women is not very common or not at all common in their community, but 41% and 45% of women disagree to this finding. We went further again to ask Nigerians, for each of the following actions, please tell me whether you think it can always be justified, sometimes be justified, or never justified for a man to use physical discipline on his wife if she has done something he does not like or think is wrong. We found that about 8 in 10 Nigerians, 79%, says it is never justified for a man to physically discipline his wife. And then we had 10% who says it's always justified. So that shows that many Nigerians feel it is never justified for a man to use physical discipline for his wife. Further questions were, if a woman in your community goes to the police to report being a victim of gender-based violence, for example, to report a rape or report being physically abused by her husband, how likely or unlikely is it that the following things might occur? She will be criticized, harassed, or be ashamed. The findings here shows that about half, 47% of the respondents we spoke to, consider it somewhat likely or very unlikely, 28%, that a woman will be criticized, harassed, or ashamed if she reports any incident of gender-based violence to authorities. Then far fewer than 24% says this is very unlikely. We went further again to ask about perception of the police in handling some of these issues when reported to them. So we asked, if a woman in your community goes to the police to report being a victim of gender-based violence, for example, to report a rape or report being physically abused by her husband, how likely or unlikely is it that the following things might occur? Her case will be taken seriously by the police or not. So, and then we found that most respondents, 79%, believe that the police are likely to take the case very seriously. So those go back to the public perception about the police, even though previous studies have shown some negative report about the police, but this finding is saying that more Nigerians believe that gender-based violence are most likely going to be taken seriously when reported to the police. So we give Nigerians opportunity to mention some of the things they feel is closest to their views. So we ask them, which of the following issues are closest to your view? Domestic violence is a private matter that needs to be handled and resolved within the family. Or domestic violence is a criminal matter whose full resolution requires the involvement of law enforcement agencies. Two-thirds Nigerians, 68%, say that domestic violence should be treated as a private matter to be resolved within the family rather than as a criminal matter. That goes back to the need for public sensitization about the issue of gender-based violence and how the people sees it, whether it's a criminal case or something that has to be handled within the family cycle.
So welcome back. That was Head Social Research at NY Post, Mr. Raphael Mbegu, talking us through the survey findings on gender-based violence. For more information on the survey findings, you can get the information on www.afrobarometer.org or www.noipolls-polls.com. We can also follow our live updates on social media, that's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at NYPolls. This data chat conversation is also available as a podcast on Anchor. So you just search for Data Chat and you get a list of all our podcast series where you can listen to even previous poll findings that we had presented. Video recording of the Data Chat conversation as well is available on youtube.com/NOI polls. So as I had said earlier, with me in the studio is advocacy officer and in-house lawyer for Tabitha Empowerment Center in the person of Gladys Emmanuel. She would be sharing, we'll be getting more insights, and she will be giving us her perspective. She would also be sharing the preferring solutions on the burning issue of gender-based violence. So it's a pleasure to have you again. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right, it's a rainy evening. Hope you didn't get drenched by the rain.
Slightly.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for making our time. So Nigerians condemn physical discipline but see gender-based violence as a private matter. Gender-based violence generally, it isn't just limited to physical abuse. It also involves sexual abuse, harmful traditional practices like child marriage, etc. So for you who is, let's get right into the conversation. As an advocacy officer, I know that you've seen a lot of these cases happening. So Africa remains the region with the highest rate of killings of women and girls by an intimate partner or a family member, with 2.7 victims per 1,000 inhabitants. What are some of the harmful social and gender norms that perpetuate gender inequality and domestic violence generally? Because these are issues. Yes.
All right, thank you so much. So the first thing is patriarchy. Many of us have heard it's a man's world. We have this prevalent in our country, Nigeria, where we see lots of male dominance in the home, male dominance outside the home, both in private and public life. So patriarchy is one of the reasons why we are where we are with the issue of gender-based violence. Another thing is some of our religious doctrines. Now, if people are one with their religion and if people are ruled by their religion, some of our religions foster gender-based violence indirectly. They also foster the principles of patriarchy too, where they totally tell the female gender to, you have to do X, Y, Z, so that you show that the male is superior to you, or you show that the male is lord over you. No, some people misconstrue this particular ideology, and then when a woman tries to come up with certain ideas, or when she tries to rise above certain societal limitations, it's often met with strict restriction, such as physical abuse and the likes. And then, of course, we have legislation, which I cannot emphasize enough. Some of our legislations kind of foster GBV, or gender-based violence. For instance, we have the Sharia law, which allows for whipping. A man can flog his wife provided there's no physical injury, and then he uses this as a corrective measure. So when we take all of this and lay them on table, we see that we are far away from what we want to achieve, but we're also a step in the right direction.
Okay. So you had earlier talked about religion, you had talked about tradition, and our report still shows the Afrobarometer Round 9 survey findings also shows that about 8 in 10 Nigerians, that's 79%, say it's never justified for a man to physically discipline his wife. So they know these things, that it's not okay to inflict physical harm on your wife. In as much as we are focused on the wife, I think it also extends to your family member. It could be your children, it could be, so when you could start with children, and then sometimes they even grow up believing that the girl child as a wife, she may believe that it's okay for physical violence for her to be physically abused. So 8 in 10 Nigerians, 79% say that it's never justified for a man to physically discipline his wife. However, the prevalence rate shows this happens way too often in families. So
there's an imbalance.
Exactly, it's a bit confusing. You know that it's not justified, it's not good for a man to physically abuse his wife, and then we still have increasing cases. So what do you think are the causes, what are the triggers for this? Why do we keep seeing this happen?
First I go back to the laws again. implementation, we have so many laws. First, we have our constitution, then we have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. Then also in Lagos, they have the Protection Against Domestic Violence law, and there are so many other legislation, criminal code and all of that. But the culture of silence is prevalent. So in as much as these laws exist, the fact that society tells the woman you need to keep quiet and you don't need to voice out what is happening, you're supposed to protect the home at all costs, is also one of the reasons. We've had series of, I engage with victims and survivors on a daily basis, and one of the things that they say is that when they come to report and then you want to take action either by filing a petition on their behalf or going to court and all of that, one of the things that comes to mind is I really don't want my family to hear about this. I don't want my church members to hear about this. So it's about, first, the culture of silence that society has over time indoctrinated the females with, that you need to keep quiet and make it work at all costs. Then also I talked about implementation. We have all of these laws, but how well does Nigeria as a state implement these laws? And the truth of the matter is that it falls beyond or below expectation. So for instance, there's violence in the home, and then the woman rushes to the police station. And the next thing she's told is, madam, it's a family matter, go back and sort it out with your husband.
I mean, that's exactly what people find is.
Perhaps you're not being submissive enough, or he's saying something and you're trying to counter it, so maybe that's why you got that reaction. So go back and make it work. So it's prevalence of culture of silence, which is prevalent, and then the lack of implementation, and also dismissive attitudes sometimes of the key stakeholders in the GBV space, such as some of the law enforcement, or even some of the law enforcement, or even traditional gatekeepers, as the case may be. Sometimes these cases are taken to traditional rulers. Now, these people know little or nothing about how cases of GBV should be handled. Because
okay, so we'll get right back to that and talking about first point of call in cases of incidents of domestic violence. However, I'll still like to, I want us to still focus on the VAPE Act.
Okay.
So I would like you to talk to us about the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. That's the VAPE Act, which was passed in 2015. So I believe that act provides protection for a wide range of violence against women, yes, including domestic violence and all of that. So how often are perpetrators, like, talk to us about this VAPE Act, and how often are perpetrators prosecuted when we look at the judicial system generally? That's one. And then when you talked about implementation, so in hand, how
all right. So first and foremost, the VAPE Act was enacted in 2015 under the administration of President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. Now, it's seen as one of the most progressive pieces of legislation because it provides for not just domestic violence now, it provides for all forms of violence against persons. So we're looking at sexual violence, we're looking at physical violence, we're looking at emotional or psychological violence, we're also looking at issues of economic deprivation and the likes. It also provides for punishment, which is what we don't often see in some of these other legislations. Even for the offense of rape, it also provides for that. Then, as per implementation, or have we seen perpetrators being sent to jail or facing the full arm of the law? Unfortunately, we have more of these cases of GBV being committed, but we have almost a 9% persecution rate. And some of societal factors contribute to this particular challenge that we are facing. How to talk about it, and they're afraid that they'll get a clapback from society, or sometimes they feel what's the right channel to go to, or the dismissive attitude, like I mentioned earlier, are some of the things that hamper the rate of people that face the full arm of the law.
All right, Abuja, if you're listening or just tuned in, we've been talking about gender-based violence with focus on enforcement and rehabilitation. So we'll be opening up the phone lines soon. We would like to hear from you what are the factors responsible for increasing cases of gender-based violence. How do we begin to sensitize citizens? How do we begin to let them know there are dangers attached to such acts? What are the long-term effects as well as enforcement of laws to mitigate such issues? We'll be opening up the phone lines for you to call in and be a part of the conversation. We are talking about gender-based violence. Our focus on the conversation is enforcement and rehabilitation. So to call in to be a part of the conversation, the numbers to call 081-84270287. I'll take it again, 081-84270287. You can also call in on 081-84270265, 081-84270265. So I'm glad it's while we are waiting for people to call in, while we are waiting to hear Nigerians speak and share their views on gender-based violence. So it was interesting to also see that Nigeria ranks, and the report shows Nigeria ranks gender-based violence as the third top 3 women rights issues. So when the survey was conducted, Nigerians had gender-based violence came up third as some of the women rights issues Nigerians want government and the society to address. And gender-based violence came up third after we had few women in influential positions in government, which is something we hear every other day, on equal access to education. So, okay, sorry, let's hold that thought. Hello, good evening, welcome to Data Chat. Your name and where you're calling from?
Good evening. Michael, I'm calling from Lugbe.
Okay, hi Michael, it's nice to have you on Data Chat.
Thank you so much. I listened to your program. It was very interesting. So, gender-based violence, like you have stated, are important issues that need to be addressed in the country. So, I like what NIPOS is doing. It's just to say kudos to your efforts, and I hope Nigerians are listening.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, like I said, it's an important issue that has been worrying everyone in the country. So thank you so much for your efforts.
Okay, all right, thank you so much. All right, the numbers to call still is 081-84270287, 081-84270287. Alternatively, you can also call 081-84270265, 081-842-70265. So yes, Gladys, so I was saying that Nigerians want governments to address the issue of gender-based violence. So you are on the field, you see these happenings, you see these things happen every day. So do you think this is a true reflection of the Nigerian situation in terms of prevalence rates? Why should we be concerned?
So first things first, I'm surprised that gender-based violence is ranking third, because at the bottom, at the heart of gender-based violence is the first two concerns that were raised: too few women in influential positions and unequal access to education.
Exactly.
Because when you have GBV in place, there's really not so much that young girls can do, especially in certain parts of the country, to access education, because we have these principles of patriarchy, some of these suppressive doctrines and all of that. So I think first of all, we need to deal with gender-based violence, and every other thing would fall in place.
Okay, all right, interesting. So still on this, how to deal with these issues, what's the best approach, what's the best way we can tackle domestic violence. But the confusion, or where there seems to be an imbalance, is that we all know that domestic violence, gender-based violence, is a very what's the word now? Basically, gender-based violence we don't encourage it. It shouldn't be encouraged. It's not something anyone should have to go through. However, more than 2/3, findings from people also show that more than 2/3, 68% of Nigerians say that domestic violence should be treated as a private matter. So when we have people still saying this, how do we address this? Like, it's almost difficult when you have Nigerians saying that domestic violence is a private matter and it should be resolved within a family rather than a criminal matter that involves law enforcement agencies. We know that most gender-based violence cases go unreported because of perceptions like this, like majorly because family issues. Hence, they decide, okay, it's a family issue, we should settle it amongst ourselves. So how much does this culture, how much does this perception, like how when we go on like this, how difficult does it make it in addressing these issues, in curbing the prevalence of gender-based violence, especially when it comes to the role culture and religion play towards that?
So if someone is saying domestic violence or gender-based violence needs to be handled within the confines of the home, it means that they haven't thoroughly understood what gender-based violence means. I hope we're aware that people die from gender-based violence, and we all are humans, and humans are entitled to what is called human rights. Now, these rights are basic. In some countries, you don't need to stress yourself so much about it. These rights include right to life, right to dignity of human person, freedom from oppression, and all of that. So if someone is saying settle within the home, it means that you're saying all the basic principles of human rights that we have are to be tossed aside, because then anybody can do anything they like and then get to settle it. There's so many things. You mentioned religion, which is a part of a very serious issue, especially in this part of the world. You've also mentioned the prevalence of silence, the fear of being judged and all of that. So overall, people shouldn't keep silent about issues of gender-based violence. They should speak up. And some of the ways to address these issues, number one, we have advocacy, which is what I like to do every time. Other people to engage in it, and what it means is you have this ideology and you're trying to persuade members of the public to buy into these ideologies. Now, in some parts of the world, I think Australia, if I'm very correct, they have flagged up issues of GBV. In fact, they have called a state of emergency on gender-based violence. So it means that this is a global issue. It's not something that should be handled with kids' gloves. But it's quite unfortunate we have the reverse in this beloved country. Yes.
So still speaking about fear of being judged and fear of being tagged when people report incidents of gender-based violence. I mean, from the findings we had also seen that respondents consider that the chances of a victim being shamed when he or she, because it's safe to say that it affects both gender, when he or she goes to make a complaint, we found 47% of respondents, of 47%, 28% said somewhat likely for a victim to be shamed when they go to report a case. We had 19% who said, okay, let's take this call, we'll be right back. Hello, good evening, it's Data Chat. Your name and where you're calling from? Oh, okay, so we lost that call. Please do call us back. You can still get through to us on 081 84270 081 84270 Alternatively, you can call us on 081 84270 265. So yes, as I was saying, that most of these cases, they refuse to report or they shy away from going to complain because of being shamed. So why is it frowned at for a person who is being violated? Your life is at risk, and then someone goes to complain and you're shaming the person or you're being judgmental. I like to think it's a matter of life and death, right? So how do we begin to address these things, especially when it comes to life being threatened? Hello, good evening. Welcome to Data Chat. Your name and where you're calling from, please?
My name is Armstrong Okwoma.
Okay, sorry, please, can you turn down the volume of your radio set?
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. Your name and where you're calling from, please?
Armstrong Okwoma.
Okay, hi Armstrong. So let's hear from you. What do you have to say about gender-based violence?
you want to look at the issue of enforcement
Okay.
and the level of knowledge which those who enforce the law have of the law they need to enforce. For instance, you have the VAT Act. Police officers are fairly aware of the existence of that act. You see some cases being enforced under the penal code or the criminal code. The VAT Act has made some progressive provisions, but sometimes when you look at the judgment, you find out that they are not reflecting to a large extent to what the law says. We want to see cases where, in line with the VAT Act, compensations are paid. That is yet to begin to happen. I wouldn't know how many lawyers that graduated after 2016 we are taught of rape in the context of the provisions of the VAT Act. So I will advocate that steps be taken to engage those who are responsible for giving effect to these laws. I wouldn't know how many faculties that study this law are aware to them, so that we don't end up having a encyclopedia, compiling laws, and people are still suffering from that same mischief which the laws are meant to address. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure having you. All right. Hello. Your name and where you're calling from?
Hello, good evening. This is from Nyanya. I've been listening to the program, and yes, I think I heard where it was mentioned that if you, I believe, supporting, if you leave the issues to be handled by the family, then it means you don't know how dangerous gender-based violence is. That may be true on the one hand, but I think our society too tries to encourage or tries to respect the sanctity and harmoniousness of family. So I think that's a good thing. It helps to foster and encourage the threads of the family. So I think it's something worth noting and something that should be also encouraged. There's a fine balance between knowing when to let the police come in and let the family handle it. I think there's a fine balance, and I think it's not. It is advisable not to just throw the option of letting the family handle or resolve the matter completely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So Gladys, back to you. So the previous caller had talked about knowledge base. That's how many lawyers, those who are responsible for enforcing these laws, those who implement these laws, how much knowledge do they have about on executing this? So it's more or less like each person knowing his role and how to come in. So what do you have to, he's also talking about if it's even in the curriculum in law school, right, for lawyers who actually come in and advocate. I mean, you're an in-house lawyer for Tabitha Empowerment, yes. So can you...
Okay, so first things first, the way the legal system works in Nigeria, when there is a domestic law, for instance, Vape Act, various houses of assembly need to pass those laws. So failure for them to pass those laws, it means those laws are ineffective in those particular states. So for instance, we have Vape Act active in Abuja, and some other states, about 22 or 25 states now have passed it. But the remaining states haven't passed it. It means that if a case of maybe rape is taken to any of the states that haven't passed the Vape Act, they might treat it under, depending if it's the North now, they might treat it under the penal code. And of course, we know that the punishment the Vape Act would prefer and that of the penal code will be different. Now, talking about the awareness creation, one thing my organization has done, especially in this years, we were able to train frontline officers, anti-gender based violence community champions. So we picked these people from various communities across FCT, and what we did is we brought some professionals to come talk to them. One of the group or the team of professionals were a team of lawyers, and they dwelt extensively on the provisions of the Vape Act. Now, these people are common people from communities, but after these 3 months of intensive training, I bet you they are able to explicitly tell you in much depth about the Vape Act and also put it into work. So first things first, the legal system that hampers this. So the fact that there's a law doesn't mean it works equally across the board. So that's one challenge on the one hand. But I'm sure that other CSOs in states that the Vape Act has been passed, I'm sure they are taking steps to ensure that people get acquainted. I mean, International Federation for Women Lawyers, FIDA, is one organization too that tries to provide sensitization around the Vape Act. They've done that in various states across the federation, and it's still ongoing.
So in essence, there's pretty much a high level of sensitization when it comes to gender-based violence.
Definitely.
All right, great. So I mean, when we look at how, okay, before we look at that, let's just quickly talk, before we wrap up the conversation, let's just quickly talk about rehabilitation. We know that gender-based violence affects one's physical, sexual, and even mental health, which is very key to realizing one's ability and even function effectively. So as an advocacy officer, I mean, are there known agencies or centers that focus on rehabilitating victims who have gone through these horrific experiences? Not just victims who have gone through these experiences, but victims who are aware of gender-based violence. But I mean, like looking at the proportion of those who believe that gender-based violence should be treated within the, so I think such persons should also go through some form of not just sensitization, but rehabilitation, because it's like you're constantly going through a vicious circle. Yeah. So how do we?
So one thing most NGOs have is it's called shelter. For some, they target safe spaces. Now, these safe spaces are places that you take persons who have gone through, depending on the form of abuse. Now, they keep them there for a particular period of time, depending on the severity of the abuse. One thing they have access to is they have access to a psychologist or a therapist. Another thing they have access to is, for some, they get like daily counseling. They also get talks on empowerment and all of that. So that is part of the rehabilitation process. I know in Abuja, organizations like Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, Daughters of Abraham, and the likes have safe spaces. I think there's also safe space at NAPTIP, but although that's classified, and I think it's for specific categories of persons. So it's not like someone is going through GBV and then there is nothing to do for the person. There are these safe spaces. There's also the psychosocial support that's being offered to victims or survivors. Victims are people who are currently going through gender-based violence, and survivors are people who have come out of gender-based violence. Truth of the matter is, even if someone has gotten out of that abusive situation, the marks are still there, both physically, medically, and otherwise.
Okay. So what are the key challenges and the gaps towards complete eradication of gender-based violence in the society and the country as a whole?
So first things first, there's not enough awareness. There's a need to intensify efforts. You go to some of these communities and you are met with restriction. They tell you head on, we don't want this kind of messages. So there's a need for us to engage more with traditional gatekeepers, because these are the people that are able to, once they give us access, the rest is very easy. So there's a need to sensitize them, perhaps on a national level, get a meeting for them and explain to them the dangers of gender-based violence. Another gap is the implementation of our laws, like I've explained before. Then we have dismissive attitude of law enforcement agencies, and we have the presence of harmful cultural practices, such as female genital mutilation, forced marriage, forced abortion, rape, and you just name it.
Okay. So lastly, before we let you go, I mean, it's been a really interesting conversation. When we look at domestic violence as a whole, domestic violence undermines households, economic security, quality of life, limiting the effectiveness of programs to improve well-being and capabilities in communities. So how do we change this for better in terms of development generally?
I think first and foremost, we all need to understand that it's our collective responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the NGOs alone. It's not also the responsibility of the legislature alone. It's our collective responsibility. So the media, those in law enforcement, the medical doctors, the market or the bus driver, everyone needs to understand that it is our collective responsibility. Don't look at it as, oh, it's an all-female affair, because that's the look I always get every time we go for community sensitization. Oh, it's all about women. No. Then we make them understand that men also go through gender-based violence. However, society has so constructed the male folks to believe that you cannot voice out what you're going through because it's deemed as you being weak.
Okay, so just in 30 seconds, tell us about Tabitha Empowerment Center for anyone listening in and doesn't really know what Tabitha Empowerment Center is and what you guys do.
All right, Tabitha Empowerment Center is a non-governmental and not-for-profit organization that is targeted towards eliminating domestic violence through advocacy, sensitization and awareness creation, provision of psychosocial support, sheltering, and also welfare services for widows. We equally provide educational assistance for indigent children. We are active on all social media handles, and we currently have two main projects running in Abuja, which is the Empower Her Initiative project and the Anti-Gender-Based Violence campaign.
Oh, nice. It would be nice to also be a part of that. Also pushing and lending a voice towards gender-based violence. So, Abuja, you've heard it all. We had Ms. Gladys Emmanuel, Advocacy Officer and in-house lawyer at Tabitha Empowerment Center. In societies, though in varying degrees, women and girls are subjected to physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, and this cuts across lines of income, class, culture, and everyone. So this begs the question, how do we break the circle? It takes only one voice. According to Kofi Annan, violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation, and it's perhaps the most pervasive. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality, development, and peace. It is Data Chat powered by NY Post. Do join us same time, same station next week to discuss findings, interesting findings at that. Do have a wonderful weekend and bye for now.